Good day, everybody. Happy Tuesday to you, unless it's Wednesday where you happen to be. You see, I don't know where you are if you're with me live. So you should probably go into the comments section of whatever social media platform you're on and tell me where you are. Say hello. Tell us where you are this morning. That would be wonderful to know. And it will also get you used to typing, because I hope that you will type over the next 30 minutes or so. No, I don't want you to multitask. I want you to type by interacting with us. I want you to imagine that you're joining my guest and I for a cup of coffee. And if you were doing that, tea perhaps, other beverage of your choice, whatever that would be. The point is, if you were joining us around a table, you wouldn't just sit there and do nothing. As my dad used to say, sit there with your teeth in your mouth. If you had a question, you'd ask it. If you had an idea, you would share it. If you had a comment, you would offer it, right? You would do that naturally. So you can do that here too. That's the value of this being live. So if you have a question, a comment, idea, share it. Just type it in and share it, just like you're typing in right now where you're located. That would be awesome for us to know. And by the way, when you do all those things, we'll have a better conversation. I can't promise that everything that you say I will use, but I certainly will try to connect as many of those dots to our conversation as I possibly can. So that's my goal. And when we do that, not only will it be more effective for you, but eventually it will be a better podcast. Because even though we're live now, or you're watching this later, recording of this live stream, eventually you can see over my shoulder that this will eventually be an episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, which we're going to start the recording for that right now. So Marissa, this is for you in 3, 2, 1. Synergy, trust, unity, success. Each of those 4 powerful characteristics will grow. Those powerful things that we want more of will all grow with one other characteristic: inclusion. Today, we're talking about what it means and what it takes to be an inclusive leader. There's never been a better or more important time to do exactly that. And so, welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively, make a bigger positive difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you are listening to this podcast, you could be with us live in the future. Not for this one, it's already passed, but in the future, you could join us on your favorite social media channel with us live. And to do that, you have to find out when those are going to take place. And the best way to do that is to join either our Facebook or LinkedIn groups, which will give you all of that scoop, as well as other inside stuff about the show. So you can go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to join us, and then find out when you can join us live in the future. Today's episode is brought to you by our Remarkable Masterclasses. Pick from 13 important life and leadership skills to help you become more effective, productive, and confident while overcoming some of a leader's toughest challenges. Learn more and sign up at remarkablemasterclass.com. And now that we've got that all out of the way, we can get to the main event. We can get to the star of the show. Her name is Priya Nalkur. She is a psychologist with a genuine and authentic approach, has earned her educational stripes from Harvard and Yale. She's really smart. She has a heart and soul. She is the heart and soul of the Roundtable Institute, a pioneering force in inclusive leadership and professional coaching. Her book, which came out on her birthday, is called Stumbling Toward Inclusion: Finding Grace in Imperfect Leadership. It offers an engaging and human narrative of her journey, beginning with her formative experiences as an outsider in a small Canadian town, evolving into her mission to reshape leadership with a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And Priya, it's a pleasure to have you join me today, right now for me, this morning. Thanks for being here.
So grateful to be here. Thanks, Kevin.
It's my pleasure. So I often open with a question about your journey. And I don't want you to go into that in great detail, because in the book, there's a tremendous amount about your journey. In fact, we were talking about it before we started, that the book is almost 2 books in one, the first kind of being like a memoir. But I do want you to talk about the journey to actually deciding to write the book and writing the book. Just to, like, you know, when you were growing up in Canada, you weren't probably thinking you were going to be an author someday. So like a little bit about how do you end up doing this work? How do you end up writing this book?
Thanks for that question. I get that question a lot. And there's really 2 reasons. One, I wrote it for me. There was a lot I had in my brain, and I was like, can I do this? So let's see if I can actually write the book and just for myself, have a book on my bookshelf and feel at this point in my career that was kind of a cool thing to do.
Okay. It's a lot of work for just the self gratification, though. I can tell you that.
It's a lot of work. It's a lot. I happen to love writing too, though. So it was also, there's a lot of highs with the lows, as you can imagine. But the second reason was, back in 2015, I had a client, everyone had gone through the program. Everyone in that company had gone through our Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion for Leaders program. And they said, the CFO came to me after one of the workshops and he said, this is all great. We love it. It's already changing the way we work and talk with each other, but we need the companion book to go with this. Like, I want the reference guide where I can just go through it and say, like, how am I supposed to ask a question in this moment? How am I supposed to listen in this moment? Can you write that book? You can just self-publish it. It'll be so easy. After you get that.
Every person who never wrote one, just saying.
Right, exactly. It'll be so easy, like famous last words, right? But then when more and more clients ask for it and you recognize that your program might be out of reach for some people because it is, it costs something. It's an investment of your time and money. So how can we spread the message of justice, equity, diversity, inclusion for leaders more broadly without people having to make such an investment? And it just complemented my personal goal to write a book really well. So I finally put pen to paper about a year ago and wrote the book.
Here we are. Well, the world is glad that you did. And so you mentioned it, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And in the open, I use the word inclusion. The book uses the word inclusion. So that's really where I'm going to focus, not meaning that the other parts don't matter. That's not really that's not my unstated intent here. So I really want to start with a hopeful question, which is, what can inclusion look like? Like, I didn't want to use the word should, right? I want to, what can it look like? This is meant to be, you could probably say it could end up looking like nothing like we want it to look. But I mean, I'm asking this in a very sort of hopeful, positive frame.
I hear you. And I think I love that word can because it opens up possibility, right? It's a much more expansive question than what should inclusion look like. So I think about it in two ways. One, there's an intrapersonal experience of inclusion, right? What is the experience within me? And what that can look like is I feel like I belong, I feel understood, I feel seen, I can say what I need to say, I can take risks, I can hold back, I can be who I need to be. That intrapersonal experience of what it can look like, to me, that's the ideal. And I want to make sure you know that it's precarious, right? I might have that one day of the week, but I might not have it 3 days of the week. But it can look like that. If I have it one day, maybe I can anchor myself and say, like, I know what it looks like. I want more of that. There's also things.
So can I just, I want to stop there for a second, because the title of the book is Stumbling Toward Inclusion, which implies that it's a journey, which implies that it's going to be imperfect.
Yes.
Implies that it's hard, right? So we talked about this. If all of us are having that intrapersonal experience, then we've created it. Is that a fair way to say it?
Yes, absolutely. We have created that. That's right. That's right.
And then I interrupted you. Where else were you going? So you talked about the intrapersonal experience. Is there more you wanted to say there?
Yeah. So the first one is the second is the interpersonal experience with someone else. Like, who are we with you? Who are you with me? How do I enable understanding in you? How do I uplift you? Can I be someone who provides a platform for you to be all that you can be? And that happens in the interpersonal space. And I think inclusion in the interpersonal space is, I can tell you the truth. I can say anything. I can challenge you. I can be challenged by you. You can resist me. And we're in it together, as messy and as clean as it can be. We're in this together. That's the interpersonal dynamic.
And let's be clear. We're all humans. And so it's going to be messy. Like, that's okay. We'll get to that before we're done, I promise. But now, if that's a picture of what this can be, then what does an inclusive leader need to or do differently? Like,
Mm.
okay, like I've been, I'm not saying me, like I'm speaking in the third person. Like I've been a good leader, I've had good success, things have gone pretty well, but now I really want to be more inclusive. I've listened to you, Priya. I think there's something else here. What do I need to do differently than I've done, even if I've been, pretty effective and in all sorts of dimensions, right? Like, what do
Yep.
I need to do different to be more inclusive?
Well, maybe nothing, right? Like if you're an effective leader already, maybe you're already doing inclusive leadership without knowing it, right? I don't mean to call inclusive leadership as a different form of leadership. It is effective leadership. It's one and the same. If you're doing effective leadership, my guess is you're listening really well. You're asking great questions. You're showing up courageously and you're being vulnerable. The same exact ingredients you need for effective leadership are the same ingredients you need for inclusive leadership. They're not different. Now, you may decide to say, like, hey, wait a second, we live in a world where justice is more important today than it ever was. What the world is talking about outside of work is coming into work. So I better pay attention to dynamics of race and gender and sexual orientation and politics and all that stuff. So if you're asking me that question, what does it mean to be a good leader in that world? Then you can extend you can extend your skill set a little bit more beyond good listening and asking good questions and being vulnerable and being courageous. The question is, are you willing and able to be an ally? Are you willing to take on the struggle of others as though it was your own? Are you willing to examine your privilege, your power, and use it to benefit others who have less privilege and less power than you?
So you mentioned it. I was going to try and find it and find it quickly, and I didn't want to look like I was multitasking, which I told people on the front end not to do while they're listening to us. But you make a point early in the book, which I agree with, and you're hinting at it here, along the line of the value of discomfort. I think you
Mm.
say something like discomfort is a useful friction, or something like it. I think that's the line. That's what I was trying to find. I think that's
Yeah.
close. Let's talk about that for a second, because you also make the point very clearly throughout the book. It was sort of to set up everybody about what does inclusive leadership look like, because you say very early, like, really great leaders are inclusive leaders, like by definition. Like it's not something different necessarily.
Mhm.
Uh, and yet you just posed some really challenging questions to all of us if we were listening carefully. And if you missed them, you all can go back and listen again. Uh, what do you mean about discomfort being useful? How do we use that, uh, both intrapersonally and
Mm.
interpersonally?
Yeah. Discomfort is that moment where we're on the edge of something new, some new learning, a new experiment, a new understanding of who we are or the place that we're or the environment that we're in. So we can do two things, really. Like to be very reductive, we can ignore it and go on with our day, or we can leverage it. We can decide that maybe there's an opening here for us to learn something new. And I love learning because it's symbiotic with contribution. And I think if learning and contribution are our driving forces as leaders, we're going to have a more positive impact in the world than if we were driven by something else like recognition and security, let's say. But being driven by learning, we're going to take that moment of discomfort and leverage it and say, okay, what's in this? Can I blow it up? Can I amplify it? Can I maybe generate a new idea? Can I stand beside someone else? Or if I'm so uncomfortable with that discomfort, can I ask someone to stand beside me and help me hash it out? So discomfort is a really good thing, and it comes in the form of resistance, challenge, opposition, hard feedback, right? These are areas that as leaders, I think I want us to invite those moments, or at least pay attention to when we're put in moments of discomfort.
And I just want to say that when we hear that word discomfort, you may be listening thinking about like the big things, right? Like maybe some of the kinds of conversations that you might be thinking about right now in this conversation that we're having about justice, equity,
Mm-hmm.
diversity, and inclusion. But that point, Priya, that you just made is just as important in the really small things, right? Because discomfort gives us the chance to be intentional and to reflect. It doesn't have to necessarily only be on the big, really hard things, because discomfort, you prick your finger and you have discomfort, even if it's only for a fleeting moment. And I think that, I think sometimes people like, well, I don't have any of those, like things are going pretty well. And yet we all have moments. We all have moments, and you use the word resistance and these other sorts of things. And I think it's worth us pondering that. You want to add to that? Like, I don't want to make this just be about the great big capital letter D discomfort things.
Correct. I think discomfort, I mean, I've thought about this a lot, and I think for me, discomfort always comes back to fear, something we're afraid of. And inclusive leadership, I start the book honestly by saying, I wanted to write a forgiving book because the truth is that people are very afraid, especially with this word inclusivity. Like people are suddenly afraid. Like, what if I say the wrong thing? That's an uncomfortable question. What if I do the wrong thing? Discomfort. What if I hurt someone? Discomfort. But we're just afraid. And so we go back and maybe not confront that fear or that discomfort. My invitation is that, yes, it's scary. And yes, you may likely say the wrong thing, but you're X years old. You've said many wrong things in your life. You've done many wrong things.
We're moving. We're learning, right?
Yes, but this is a necessary discomfort. This is a necessary experiment for you to face. You cannot ignore this anymore. You've got to maybe learn by saying the wrong thing and then repairing it when you do. And repair goes well beyond an apology.
You're talking about being vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
And I've been working with and training and coaching and writing to leaders for a lot longer than you, because I know your age, because we talked about it before we started. Trust me, longer than you. And 30 years ago, when you were in high school, the word vulnerability wouldn't have shown up in very many conversations about leadership. And now it shows up all the time.
Yeah.
And it's not just because of the topics that we're talking about. It's more than that. And yet everything that you just said was about being willing to be vulnerable. And I'll go back to intrapersonally and interpersonally.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Anything more you want to say about vulnerability specifically before we go?
I really appreciate that you situated it in a historical context, meaning that 30 years ago, we weren't having this conversation. Can you imagine a world where the parameters of what we are allowed to be and do and say were very, very strict, and we couldn't really, I'm guessing, we couldn't
I was going to say, how do you know? But go ahead.
But the fact that we can talk about it today, at least as a theoretical concept, means we're opening up a possibility of being more real with ourselves, even if we're just more real in private with ourselves.
Well, it's more than just a theoretical concept. For some people, it's not much more than that. But it's generally now seen, and I'll just say sort of in the business press, I'll use that framework as not just a theory, but a valuable attribute, right?
Correct.
Where 30 years ago, it was more of a theory. I mean, no one disagreed with that idea. Well, no one. Few people ultimately disagreed with that idea.
Yeah.
But in practice, it wasn't necessarily seen as
An asset.
An asset, right?
Yeah, it's an attribute. Today, it's an attribute. It's a set of behaviors. It's the way I think of it is it's permission. When I'm vulnerable, every time I do this, and I don't always, I can't plan to be vulnerable. It just sort of happens.
I'm going to be vulnerable today. Writing that down on my list of to-dos.
Check.
Be vulnerable.
Now I'm done. I can go on with my day. But when it does happen, it's almost always met with appreciation and gratitude, like, oh, thanks. Now I see myself. Or what I've noticed is people doing the same thing, right? That's what leadership is ultimately. Like, are you influencing people to be the person they mean to be? And vulnerability enables that time and time again. Sometimes I don't even know I'm being vulnerable, and someone says, thanks for your vulnerability. Now I can share my story.
Well, it's interesting. So it's an attribute, it's characteristic. We said those things, but it's a behavior. And you
Yep.
said that too. My point being this, that it's like any other skill, we get better at it, which means there are things that you just described it, that you will say, like, that didn't feel hard to me. That didn't feel being vulnerable. I'm just being honest.
Yeah.
That same thing 5 years ago might have been very hard for you to say.
You got it.
Now it's
Yeah.
not. Now it's just like, this is part of how I operate. This is part of my operating system. This is part of my natural inclination, but it wasn't once. And so it's like a lot of other things. It's a skill that we can build. And I think
Yes.
that's really
Yeah.
useful.
Thanks for saying that. It's so true. And as you know, because you've read a lot of the book, is I talk a lot about these skills being developmental. And that's why it's called stumbling towards inclusion. Like a 12-month-old baby doesn't give up after they fall on the ground when they walk. They get back up. They stumble.
And we don't give up on them either.
Yes, that's right. That's the interpersonal piece.
Yeah,
Right. So we don't give up on them. They know they're in an environment where they're safe to do that, where they can stumble. And so, like, I'm not saying go and stumble everywhere you can. Do it in environments where you have some safety, where you know that someone's going to be there to help you get back up again. And, it's amazing. Sometimes we don't know that we have that safety. I fell off a treadmill back in February, and it was amazing. There's like plenty of people in the gym. Only one person came to me. Many people watched. One person came up to me and said, I can help you sue the gym. Like, it's kind of amazing how the environment responds to your stumbles. And you, like, those are the conditions that are required for you to decide, okay, is this safe enough? Is this a place for where I can stumble? So, this, like, invest in those relationships, build insulation interpersonally so that you can stumble.
So let's talk a little bit more about that. Like, I hinted at it in the open. You bumped up against it several times. You used the word safety like 4 times in the last answer. Psychological safety is another one of those things that no one talked about 25 years ago.
Yeah.
Even though we sort of understood it at some level, it didn't have language yet. It has language now. What connection would you give to inclusion? How would you connect inclusion and psychological safety?
Yeah. When we feel safe, one, we can stumble. And when we, all of that, the ability to experiment, to fail, to make mistakes is what a psychological safe environment enables you to do. But we only do that when we feel like we can be accepted, when we're in an environment where we belong, right? There are many places in my life, and probably you too, Kevin, like, we could have a whole conversation about this. Many places in my life where I'm not prepared to stumble. Like, those are places where I don't feel that level of safety or inclusion, where I'm going to still be valued and accepted for who I am, even though I made a mistake.
Yep, I think that's right. So I mentioned this to you before we went live, that some of the chapter titles to me are brilliant. And so everybody, we're talking with Priya Nalkur, the author of Stumbling Toward Inclusion, Finding Grace in Imperfect Leadership. Every word in that is important. But most of the chapters, everybody, are short, 2, 3, 4 pages, almost like mini essays in some ways.
Yep.
That may not be where they're intended, but that's sort of how I took them. And what I want to do as we sort of start to move towards the finish is I'm just going to give a couple of the titles of the chapters and just let you riff on that idea. I don't want you to give us a chapter summary. I just want to talk about that idea. There were a couple of things that were really impactful for me. And I just want to put those out in front of you. Probably the thing I will remember the most about the book.
What a cool game.
Headwinds and tailwinds.
Yeah, well, this is not.
By the way, if we're talking about diversity and inclusion, you got the old white man and the young brown woman. Just say it. Like, so we got sort of we got difference here, right?
Yeah.
On multiple levels. And this phrase, which if I remember right, isn't actually your phrase, but you leaned into it.
Yeah.
Talk to us about this, because for me, this was a really useful way to think about it.
So good, right? I love this. I love this too. It's not my phrase. So I got this from Dolly Chugg's book, The Person You Mean to Be. Fantastic book. And the reason this language works so well is because it's not charged. It's very neutral language, and it's a metaphor that we all understand. For example, if I'm flying from Austin, Texas to Boston, and I happen to have a headwind that day, and the plane is like facing a headwind, I'm going to get there. Like, it's going to take longer to get there by no fault of the pilot or me or anyone else.
We can still get there.
We'll get there.
Harder.
It's going to be more effort, more fuel, and more time. But if I have a tailwind, the wind at my back, and we've all experienced this, like walking up a hill or walking along a beach, we have a tailwind, we feel like we're freer. We have an advantage that was unearned, and we get to Boston maybe 1 hour earlier. Now I have all this free time. How lovely. And I didn't ask for it. I didn't make it happen. It just kind of got it. The conditions were right for me to get an advantage. And so like that, some of our social identities represent headwinds and tailwinds, and those are defined by the social systems we operate in by no fault of our own, and we can't redefine them either. But once we know them, we can work with them and we can leverage them.
That's the key part. Recognizing that is half, not all.
Yeah.
Of the battle. Another one of the chapter titles. By the way, she has no idea what I'm going to say. Lowering the waterline.
Isn't this so great? Lowering the waterline. Also not my idea. So this came from a course I took on deep democracy, co-resolve, but I use this and I have definitely expanded my understanding of lower the waterline. What it means is between you and I right now, Kevin, like we're having this nice conversation. I guess we're having fun, but I'm certainly having fun.
I don't know if you are. I
am. Okay, so great. So what we just did was lower the waterline, right? Like we had an assumption, but we didn't name it. And like that, there's all kinds of assumptions between us, right? Like, what got you interested in this book, and what did you do this morning, and how did you prepare, and where are you really sitting, and all that stuff that we're not talking about. And if we go lower and lower and lower, what we're going to do is we're going to come up against something that is going to be real uncomfortable for us to talk about. But that is the gem of our conversation, because in that is some shared wisdom that we could generate by being in dialogue with each other and maybe debating it out with an understanding that nobody has a monopoly on the truth, and our relationship with each other matters. And so I always want leaders to seek to go below the waterline, because that's where the richness of your humanity and your relationship really live.
I could play this game with probably 5 more chapter titles, but we don't have time.
I love this game.
So what I want to ask a final question. There's obviously so much we could talk about. There's a number of loops that we opened that we could try to close.
Yeah.
But is there anything that you really wish I would have asked, or that we would have talked about that we didn't?
You asked all the big questions in the book, this is about embracing failure and moving forward in the world of inclusive leadership. And so it's not just the book about facing your fear. It's really about asking yourself, why are you afraid? What will it look like when you stumble? And how can you get back up and repair when you do?
There are some people who are watching this who are afraid of that word inclusion.
Yes, I know.
That are afraid of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I will boldly say that if this is making you in some way, even if you wouldn't say it out loud, squeamish, scared, guilty, then you really need to read the book. And you will find hope and grace and forgiveness and enlightenment in this book. There you go. So Priya, I'm going to shift gears. I probably should have saved that to the very end, but there it was. So
you really did drop the mic there. That was really good. That was good.
Well,
Yeah.
we'll let you can use that as a testimonial. How about that?
Okay. Good.
You can go we'll clip it. You can clip this out and go over there. Listen, everybody. We'll let Priya say a little bit more about how to get connect with her and all that in a second. But a couple other questions I'd like to ask people. So Priya, what do you do for fun?
I hike with my kids and we dance in the kitchen. We do this like almost every day. That's what I do for fun.
No one has ever in 440 episodes said that they dance in the kitchen with their kids.
Really? Oh, it's my
I'm not saying
favorite.
that no one does it. I'm saying no one mentioned that in that moment.
Yeah.
That's the first on the show. Now the question that I ask everybody is, what are you reading, or what's something you've read recently, Priya?
I am reading Private Equity by Catherine Sun. It's a memoir about her journey in private equity and seeking equity for herself. It's fantastic. It's brilliant. It's so, so, so good. And it's like very confronting. It's a beautiful book.
Private Equity, that'll be in the show notes, as of course we'll be stumbling towards inclusion. So you can check the show notes wherever you're watching or listening to this podcast to get that. But where do you want to point people? Like, where can people learn more about you, Priya, about the book, about your work? Like, I'll hold the book up and you can tell people where they can find you and it.
They should go to my website, priyanalkur.com. There's all kinds of free tools, right? Like you can do an assessment to see what your personal stumbling blocks are. It's free. You can order a copy of the book. You can watch all kinds of, videos and read journals, articles that I've written about this. If you want to go further, there's excerpts on the book. There's audios. If you're not ready to buy it, listen to the audio. It's all there.
All right. I hope you'll do that. And so now, Priya, thank you so much for being here. But before we go, I have a question for all of you who are watching or listening, whether it's now with us live or whether it's later. It's the question I ask every week. Now what? What are you going to do with this? Maybe you had some things to think about from this conversation. Maybe you want to think more about what does learning and contribution mean to you. Maybe you want to think more about safety. Maybe you want to think more about your interpersonal experience with inclusion. I'm just sharing a couple of things that I wrote down. What I wrote doesn't matter. What matters is what you got that you're going to act on, because unless you act on it, sort of, what's the point? I mean, Priya said she and I had fun, which we did. And I hope you did too. But what I really hope, I think what we both really hope, is that this can be a meaningful use of 30 minutes of your time. And that will only truly be the case if you take some action. Priya, thank you so much for being here. It was such a pleasure and an honor to spend the last 30 minutes with you.
Thank you, Kevin. I really appreciate it. This started my day off just right.
Well, I love that. So all of you, I don't know when you're listening to this, whether it's the morning, the afternoon, the evening. I hope you're not sleeping. But what I do hope is that if you found this useful, that you will share it with somebody else. And that if this is the first time you're with us, that you'll come back and know that wherever you listen to your podcasts, you can find it. The Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Look for it, find it, subscribe, share it. You know what to do. Just do it. And come back next week for another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast.